and colleagues. And the question you asked about the economic impact, I wish I had the exact answer. I think everybody is looking for that. And what we are doing, and I think I want to build also what Lord Darcy said earlier, Ara said, we are also based on facts. So as McKinsey, we are looking at the facts, and therefore we have developed various scenarios. And the scenarios depend actually on safeguarding, on one hand, lives, like what happens actually to save lives. And the other hand is to safeguard livelihood. So basically the way of creating, if you want, value, having jobs, earning, and so on. And if you're in a lockdown, this is hampered. And therefore the scenarios have actually two axes. One is on the on safeguarding lives, how effective are the measures that are being put in place and how the spread of the virus is contained. So if it is very effective, then usually the impact is 2 to 3 months only, I put it this way. And therefore on the economic side, I think the rebound is faster. If it's like a medium scenario where you have some resurgence, but you more or less, I think, prevent, if you want a catastrophe, a global one, then I think it takes longer the recovery. So it may take like 2 years longer, and I will come with specific scenarios. And if it's a broad failure, then it will be probably the biggest depression we ever have experienced. Yeah. So that's that axis. And then on the economic side, it also depends what actually governments are doing, what companies are doing, and what the action is. Again, here, if there's an effective intervention, so there are policies that prevent that there is structural damage and the pre-crisis fundamentals are kept, the recovery will be faster. The medium scenario is that partially these interventions are successful, like the banking crisis is avoided as an example. And then the recovery will take longer, but you eventually will get to the levels where we were used before. And then obviously you have again a catastrophic scenario. If there's widespread bankruptcies, the banking system collapses, and that will be a disaster. So you have 9 scenarios if you take those. It's 3 axes and the intervention, you know, and then on the economic side. We believe as McKinsey right now, we don't see that as black. So we are basically saying this very negative scenarios. At this moment, there is no reason to believe that will happen. So we are probably more in the middle scenarios. And I'm going to basically take 2 middle scenarios that at this moment, I find they are likely. And as we are speaking, we are observing and trying to get additional facts to get, you know, those scenarios more concrete. If you take like a scenario where the virus spread is being controlled quickly, like it's in 2 to 3 months, you have that under control. And the economic measures are like the medium scenario, what I just mentioned. There, I think basically what will happen is that the GDP in the second quarter of the world GDP will decline by 4.9%. And we will end up with the GDP worldwide 2020 end of the year with minus 1.5%. And we will get to pre-crisis levels end of the year. So this is like a scenario that is more on the optimistic side. The effects are different by countries. So if you take the Eurozone, the effect will be deeper. And we heard actually a bit in the discussions, it's very difficult to get an aligned reaction on the European side. And therefore it hampers actually also the economic activity. So in the Eurozone, we would think that the drop in the second quarter would be 9.5% in GDP, and the GDP would end up with minus 4.4%. That would be our forecast. And Europe would be like 1 quarter behind the rest of the world in terms of recovery. Yeah. On the other hand, we believe that if China and Japan stay the course as they are right now, they will be pretty much the fastest out. So in the third quarter of 2020, Japan will manage to get to a 0 GDP growth, China minus 0.4. And the US is like in between. This is like that scenario. And then if I take another scenario, which basically is one where the virus spread is only the medium scenario, not the optimistic one. So you have some resurgence and things coming up. That's where actually the recovery will be only in the third quarter of 2022. So we are talking about a long period here. And the GDP in 2020 will be minus 4.7% worldwide. In the Eurozone, minus 9.7, US minus 8.4, Japan minus 5.6, China minus 2.7. So the spread is really wide. And I want to underline what Ara said. Also, it's extremely important to try to contain the virus as fast as possible because it has major economic impacts the longer the situation continues. And if we make now comparisons, because you asked how big is going to be the depression, actually right now for the US, we believe this is going to be the sort of the biggest, probably it may reach the big depression, but definitely it will be the biggest one since the Second World War, the effect in the US. So we are right now thinking between -8 and -13% on the US in terms of real GDP percentage from the peak to the trough, approximately. Yeah. And you have seen other forecasts from investment banks who came out for the second quarter, like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. They're all like between 24 and 30% drop in the next quarter for the US. So it's actually in line a bit of what you are saying. The other important message I would like to give is that this effect will vary by industry. Different industries are affected by the crisis in a different way. Actually, right now, I would say the retail business is actually benefiting. And many of the stores, like in Japan, have record sales because people don't go out to eat in restaurants. They cook at home and they buy things in bulk. So they have actually, they're selling right now more in this basic retail goods. Whereas apparel, fashion, luxury, things that are not really needed, they are down -35% as an example. And right now you can see that oil and gas is hit the most right now with -60% as an example. So the range is very big between industries, and this the recovery from those industries will also vary because if you're coming from a very low base, it takes longer to go up. So for instance, aerospace will take longer, air and travel will take longer, whereas retail, as an example, or even automotive may take faster. Once the supply chain in automotive, the supply chain is fixed, that could go faster, yeah, as an example. I would like to also underline what Nubar said, and it's very much also in line of what we are thinking. I think every crisis has also an opportunity, and the first thing obviously is to survive. We call it actually to resolve and resilience. So these are the first two steps. And this is true for individuals, this is true for companies, it's true for governments, that we really have to make sure that we survive, yeah, first thing. Secondly is returning to work, and Nubar mentioned to that. Here we have to think, and Ara also alluded, we cannot stay in a lockdown forever. So we really have to think, when is the right time? What markers and indicators do we need to know on the health side? When is it safe to get back? And what precautions are we going to take? And we have to think about that and make sure that we can get back in order to get the economy working again. And then this phase of reimagination, we call it, of the new normal. There will be a new normal. So the future will not look the same. Some positive effects we are seeing, for instance, in digital. There was a lot of debate that there are much more opportunities in doing things in digital, but behavioral change is so difficult. This actually crisis is accelerating that. So we are seeing like customers of banks, customers in retail, even other processes are being digitalized as we speak. And we believe, I think they will stay, many of those things will stay digital. so they won't go back. So that could be an opportunity. And then the big area, and Nubar alluded to that, is the reform, actually, the way we think about our healthcare system, or sick care, as Nubar mentioned. And the way, actually, I think it was very, very informative for me how Dr. Navarro also was characterizing the restrictions that the WHO is facing. And the question is, if we really want for the future to be prepared, whether we have to think the overall, I would say, governance and overall decision rights and how we are approaching these things on that level. And this is also true for company levels. And I would like to also say a couple of words. What is it actually what we are currently recommending? Because we're helping now as McKinsey, mostly actually on pro bono basis, governments in their decision making and how to approach. And the first thing is obviously to maintain and we are only economic advisors, so we cannot advise on the medical epidemiological side. But on the economic side, the first thing is, how do you maintain household economic welfare? So basically, if you're out of a job, don't have any savings, you have to still to survive. And there have to be programs in place to make disposable income available fast. You need some employment safeguards, some retraining, regeneration, we call it. That's extremely important. Then in terms of the companies, to make sure that they keep their liquidity and their cash flow, because otherwise they will go bankrupt. And the question is also, those who are losing their revenues, how are they going to, what are any other businesses, adjacent businesses, are there any ideas they can approach? And obviously some cost reductions that could be done in the short term. And then last but not least is the financial stability, the monetary policy actions, and the prudent, we call it always financial measures to relax, for instance, adequacy requirements for banks in this special situation. It's important to have the right guidance here. And last but not least, I would like to also stress what both Ara and Nubar said. This stage is extremely important to understand. There are many unknowns, but there are also many facts around. And we are experiencing that those facts actually are in different places, and it's very difficult to get the overall overview. Therefore, we are recommending to create a nerve center, that's for our companies, that really get all the information that exists in one place, and use that to see how the companies can protect their employees, protect customers, look at their supply chain and see how it can be stable, look at with the customers to see how they can stay close to the customers, even though there is no physical or in-person interaction possible. And it's also important that they do financial stress tests, so make sure the cash position is there so they can stay afloat. And last but not least, the morale and the motivation of the employees is very important. So it's very important for the companies to remind what is the purpose of the company and what are the employees, why are they so important? Because I think the spirits and the positive thinking is in this situation important. So if I might summarize, I think we are right now at the beginning. So we are right now trying to survive, I think, to what Nubar said. We are probably in that phase and not trying to get to the next phase of revival. So that's where we are right now. There are obviously thriving opportunities that we should think about. Yeah. And overall, I think collaboration, and I think this what you're organizing, Ruben, is very important. So all of us have the same information and can help in a more, if you want, in a systematic way. And then the last thing on Japan, you asked me, I'm talking here from Japan, I'm sitting here in Japan. Japan is actually one of the few countries currently that is not under lockdown. So life in Japan is close to normal. So we have in-person meetings, we go to the supermarket, we have goods there, we have domestic travel. And the reason I think Japan is where it is first of all, it took measures very early. It's close to China. It was one of the first countries that actually closed the border to those areas where the infections were high. Very, very early, Japan closed the schools, closed the gyms, closed public spaces, closed restaurants where the tables are too close, so the social distancing was applied. And then Lubor had it on his chart. Japan has also very strong social norms that help in this situation, like wearing masks, obedience of the population if there are some restrictions being imposed. And this have helped so far. And I'm saying so far because over the last week I have seen some carelessness in the general public. And I'm really hoping that we stay and the Japanese stay disciplined so we can continue as is. And like 3 days ago, the governor of Tokyo, Koike-san, basically said if we basically continue to be careless, she's willing to do a lockdown for Tokyo. And I'm hoping that people are following that. So that's the situation in Japan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.